Named after the shape-shifting mythical god Proteus, the Protea family includes an incredible diversity of floral shapes and colors, which provide food for insects and birds across the Cape. After all, what is fynbos without the unapologetic splendor of Protea flowers? From our majestic national flower to the shy dwarf Proteas, which bloom close to the ground, no other indigenous plant family has enjoyed such popularity as the ones affectionately known as Suikerbosses. The Proteaceae family includes some of the most spectacular cut flowers to have originated in the fynbos, such as the pincushions, blushing brides and the cone bushes. Almost all of them have become adapted to the perennial fires which ravage the Cape every 10 to 15 years. In fact, most are dependent on fires to stimulate germination of their seeds as they shoot out from the ashes left behind. They have become symbols of resilience and a sight which evokes immense pride for our national flora of South Africa. Fynbos is well known for its cut flower abilities. Whether it's the foliage, whether it's the seed, or whether it's the flower itself. They are long lasting and is sought after around the world. It's not an easy plant to grow and it's very localized of where you can grow fynbos. But there's one fynbos plant in particular that is extremely sought after and beautiful. And that one is Protea cineroides, or the king protea. And it's also the South African national flower. The king protea is not as spectacular as a plant. You can see this one is quite scraggly, it's got a lot of markings on the leaves, and it looks, well, not your typical beautiful pot plant. But the flower makes up for that. But it's not just one flower, it's a whole collection of flowers. If we look closely to a Protea cineroides flower, you'll see that it's got these big bracts, the bright pink colored bracts on the edge of the flower. Those are not petals, those are modified leaves, and those modified leaves protect the actual flowers inside. They are also the flags that wave in the wind to attract its pollinators and say, listen, here I am, the nectar is here, it's available for you. Inside this cone is hundreds of individual flowers. And if we pull one out, you'll see that one flower on its own, it's quite unimpressive. There it is. That is an individual Protea flower. It's got the male part and the female parts. But together, it's a spectacle to see. Now, Protea cineroides, where does the name come from? Protea comes from the Greek god Proteus, and Proteus was able to shapeshift. He could change into different things, and that's the same with Protea cineroides, because here it's dark pink, it's quite small, but in other parts of the fynbos, other parts of the country, as this is one of the most widespread Proteas you'll find, it changes from pure white to an enormous flower or even smaller. So it can shapeshift a little bit. Cineroides comes from the word cynara, which is a globe artichoke. So when the bud of Protea cineroides is still closed, it's remarkably close to a globe artichoke that's still about to open. This plant lasts a long time in the vase, and that is why it's commercially so successful. Protea cineroides is such an iconic flower. There's a pride in South Africa of having the king protea as our national flower. We name our national sports teams after this flower. It's so different to any other flower that you find in the natural world, and that is why we have this so close to our hearts. Protea cineroides cater for sugar and sunbirds exclusively. The nectar is held right down at the bottom of the flower, so it's hard for any other insects to get to. I've seen lots of ants also on the flower drinking and stealing a little bit of nectar. But for such a big flower like this, it makes a remarkably low amount of seeds. Not many flowers actually get to produce seed. But for the seed also to grow, it needs a fire. And that we get in this area about every 10 or 15 years. And only then will the seed be released and can germinate. But the main plant, this old mother plant, won't die. Underground, there's buds waiting to reappear. And once the fire goes through, that stimulates the new buds underground to grow and shoot out. And the old plant will regain its strength and will flower again, but it will also have provided new babies. Some of the nuts are also spread by rodents. It's quite nutritious, and they would bury it in the ground, and some of the nuts would be forgotten, and those ones will grow. So it's actually so fitting that the King Protea would be our national flower. Because if you think about it, it's all about teamwork. There are hundreds of little flowers, all working together for one goal, to get pollinated and to make seed. And that's the same for us as South Africans, all working together for one goal. But the Protea is also known to overcome obstacles, as a fire goes through and new growth comes after. And that is why Protea cineroides is so significant and so apt for us to use as our national symbol of pride. So Protea flowers come in all shapes and sizes. And one of the most interesting shapes for me is this. This is Protea aurea. Aurea meaning golden, because it's glowing in the morning sun at the moment. What makes the shape so weird and wonderful is its resemblance of a badminton shuttlecock. As with many of the Proteas, this is not a single flower. It's an arrangement of little flowers, giving you this crown exploding from the center. Protea aurea is also pollinated by birds mainly, although there's a lot of ants inside, but they're just there to have some sweet nectar. Nothing to do with the pollination really. The seed is held onto the plant until the fire comes through, and we can see lots of them on the plant that's been there for many years already. Once the fire comes through, the seed will be released, the mother plant most probably would die, and the seedlings would emerge after rainfall the following season. Proteas protect their little babies with lots of little hair. Like we would cradle our babies, so they do so, even though the mother is not nearby. So the little juvenile Protea plants are protected with lots of hair on the leaves, and that protects it from the extreme heat, water loss, and also the wind. Once the juvenile Protea plants mature and they grow very quickly, then they lose the hair and a waxy layer starts to develop. And in turn, that would protect the plant in future. It will quickly make spectacular flowers like this, a very unusual Protea that we see next to the rose here in the garden route. And then that pollen on its forehead gets deposited on the female parts of the flowers, and so pollination happens. So the fynbos is known for its proteas, and a part of that Protea family is your pincushions or leucospermums. It's used all over the world as cut flowers. It's a very majestic flower. It's a flower that represents the cut flower industry in South Africa so well. And here they are in their natural habitat. This is Leucospermum gordifolium. It's probably the leucospermum that's used the most in creating those beautiful hybrids that you can buy in your flower shop. Now, a bush like this gets to about 1.5 meters. It flowers now, early summer to late summer, and this is the primary food at the moment for the sunbirds and the sugarbirds. Now, when it comes to pollination of this flower, it's quite ingenious at what it does. The flower head looks like one individual flower, but in fact, it's a combination of hundreds of florets to create this one seemingly flower-like shape. So if I pull out one flower, this is how an individual floret looks like. That is the male part. It hosts the pollen. And that's essential to get to this part. That is the female part to get pollination, but from another flower. We want cross-pollination to get stronger genes and stronger plants. So when the sunbird goes in, it drinks and pushes its beak right down to drink the nectar. And when it does that, the pollen gets deposited on its neck and its forehead. When it goes back to the flower, perches on the flower, then it bends down to drink nectar again from a different one, and then that pollen on its forehead gets deposited on the female parts of the flowers, and so pollination happens. And that is why they have this pincushion shape. You get them in a few different colors. All the hybrids get yellow, red, pinkish, and this beautiful orange. It's a lovely shrub, easy shrub for gardens too. But this is not the only special species in flower now. There's another one with even more hidden secret waiting us around the corner. In the fynbos, leucospermums is quite a famous part of it, especially this one. We use leucospermums or pincushions in our flower bouquets or as pot plants around the world. But this family is diverse. There's some interesting parts of this family, and one of them is this little guy here. This is called Leucospermum prostratum. Prostratum meaning growing close to the ground. And there's a reason for that. The big leucospermum, the one we know, attracts birds, sugarbirds and sunbirds to pollinate the flower. The flower is engineered in such a way that it's exactly the right size, length for the beak to go in, get the pollen on it, on the bird itself, and then pollinate the next flower. Has no scent. Birds don't need scent. It's high up through the fynbos, so the birds can see the vibrant color of the flower. Its brother, prostratum, doesn't need that. He caters exclusively to insects. Insects that are low to the ground. That is why the flower is not as big, but it's highly scented. Insects appreciate a bit of cologne. So if I smell this flower, it's got a sweet jasmine scent, a bit spicy, but that's what the insects are after. The flower is shaped exactly the right size for a bee to walk through it, and the pollen rubs on it and then would be rubbing off the next flower. The magical part about this plant is how it germinates, how it spread its seeds. Ants. Ants scour the plant, not only pollinating it also, but looking for ripe seed. Once the seeds are ripe on the plant, the ants harvest them. Why? It's a hard nut, but that hard nut is covered by an oily, fatty substance. And that is highly nutritious, and that's what the ants are after. So once they harvested the seed, they take it back to their nest and bury them for future consumption. Once they have eaten the fatty bits, they do not touch the nut. The nut stays there, but it's scarified once they nibbled all the oily bits of it. Once moisture comes from the next season's rain, the nut would germinate. It's already put underground, it's planted in luxurious circumstances. And that ensures the future of this beautiful leucospermum. Such a gorgeous one, not easy to see in the landscape because it's so hidden away, but what a beauty. The flower ratio to the plant is actually enormous. So the amount of energy that this little plant needs to put out to get pollinated and attract the pollinator is enormous, and a lot rides on that. If we think of proteas, we think mainly about those gorgeous cut flowers that we have in our bouquets. Those proteas are huge and they grow on massive shrubs. But there's another world of proteas all around us, and they are low to the ground. You can almost not see them. The leaves don't even look like proteas. they're more grass-like. And those are the dwarf proteas, or the ground proteas. And there's a very interesting reason why they're so low down on the ground. This is Protea scorzonerifolia. Nerifolia meaning narrow leaves. And this Protea does not get any bigger than this. It's in full flower at the moment in the heat of summer. The flower ratio to the plant is actually enormous. So the amount of energy that this little plant needs to put out to get pollinated and attract the pollinator is enormous, and a lot rides on that. But who is the special pollinator for this Protea? Well, scorzonerifolia has two. It does get pollinated by birds, but there's another interesting pollinator, and that is rodents, mice. Now birds, when they pollinate, those big proteas that you see on the large shrubs advertise their nectar because they're bright in color. Flowers are big and it's showing upright. And that works for the bird. It sees the color and it also can perch high up in the air to drink nectar. Birds don't want to be close to the ground. Close to the ground is dangerous. There are snakes and other predators. So rodents at night run around. That's the time that they like to drink and feed. And that is when this Protea starts to send out a scent. It's not a very pleasant scent. It almost smells like bread. It's a yeasty scent, and that attracts the mice. They would run up the flower and then lick all the droplets of nectar that's collected at the bottom of the flower, and so pollination happens. It's usually, most of the ground proteas are a creamy, dull white or green color. Mice don't care about color because they come and feed at night most of the time. But there are quite a wide range of ground proteas. Right next door is Protea alcalis. It's finished flowering at the moment, but this Protea, with its beautiful blue leaves, broad leaves, this is more Protea-like, has smaller flowers, even lower to the ground. And its flower, which is finished now, is exclusively to rodents, all the field mice. So rodents for Proteas are very important, not only for pollination, but also for germination. Now when the seeds are ready, the rodents also harvest them and eat them. But they take a lot of the seed into their little burrows underground. And as we grow older, we all tend to forget some things, and so the mice do too. And some of the seed pips stay underground, and it's a perfect spot for them to germinate. Why is the leaves of this Protea so small? As we are sitting here, the wind is howling away, and the bigger the leaves and the taller the plant, the more sturdy your branches need to be, otherwise your leaves will break. These are perfectly adapted to the wind. The wind channels through it without hardly moving them, just as the restios and the grasses in the surrounding area. The flowers have big bracts on the sides, and those bracts keep the shape of the flower and keep the flower intact in the wind. They are not petals. They are just modified leaves, and inside is a whole colony, a whole floret of little flowers. And that is what the mice are after, because inside are little tiny little droplets, like pearls of sweet, sweet nectar. And that is also why Protea is also known, a lot of them, as Sakerborsies. So Proteas come in all shapes and sizes. And for each different shape, there's a reason for that to be. And that is the magic about evolution and the magic about diversity. Because for every bit of land that's open, a plant adapts itself to colonize that spot. And that gives us all these different shapes and forms of plants all around us. And this Protea, this tiny little plant, compared to the big ones that we all know, is such a beautiful example of how evolution changes species. On the slopes of Table Mountain, there's a family member of the Proteaceae that is quite unique, quite architectural and exceptionally beautiful against the mountain backdrop. And this is it. This is Leucadendron argentium, or the silver tree. It's very rare and it only occurs on a few slopes around the Cape Peninsula. But this tree is so photogenic because its leaves give that silver bright color. There's a reason for Leucadendron's leaves to have such a silver shine to it. If we look closely, we see that the leaves are covered with hundreds and thousands of little hairs. And that regulates the temperature and also prohibits it from losing too much moisture during summer heat. Now, the cooler it is, the more upright the hairs are. So also the tree doesn't look as shiny and as silver. The hotter it gets and the more sunlight it gets directly onto its leaves, the flatter the hair on the leaf starts to lie down, and the more the shyness on the Leucadendron, and some of it can literally glitter in the sun. Leucadendron argentium has female and male trees. The females make these big cones. They're also silver in color once they're young. After the female seed has set and developed, she branches out to fork and develop more branches that does the same thing, make cones and fork again. The male trees make small little cones, lots of pollen, but after they've done their job and the pollen has pollinated the adjacent female trees, they tend to fall off. But on the female tree, the cones stay on the tree. They don't fall off. And they will remain on the tree until she dies. And when she dies, the cones dry out, and each of the seeds inside, those nuts, have a little parachute. And that's the remnants of the old flowers. Wind comes through, it dries out, cracks open, and it takes these little parachutes far and wide into the mountain behind me. And so hopefully new trees will grow. They do grow fairly quickly, but their lifespan is short, fairly longer than 20 years. There are some countries overseas where Leucadendron argentium are grown ornamentally, but they are very susceptible to disease. And it's not an easy tree to grow in your garden, but one of the Cape Peninsula's most architectural and most awe-inspiring proteas. In the next episode, we leave the green slopes of the fynbos and venture into the deserts of the Cape, where plants have come up with ingenious ways to thrive in the unforgiving landscapes of the Karoo.